I would like to introduce Jacob Appelbaum, the speaker of WikiLeaks. He's an independent security specialist.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I guess I'd like to start off by saying that the best indicator for telling the future is to look at the present and to understand how the past informs on the present. So, for example, a major security threat is internet filtering and censorship. And several people on this panel represent companies that during the revolution, they censored the internet quite heavily, most respectfully TE Data, blocking Twitter. I was actually accessing computer networks from the United States that were located here in Egypt. And now you look at the pamphlets around here, you see that the companies at ICT, and I mean this with all due respect, are saying that they powered the revolution. What they actually powered was the regime. And now that the regime has fallen, they want to exploit the revolution for corporate profits. Well,
Jacob, can you define censorship in your terminology?
Absolutely. So censorship in this case is restricting access to a particular website. I had a list of all of the servers that Twitter runs, and all but 2 of them were blocked by TE Data. And this meant that Twitter was not able to be used. Yeah. But specifically, I have data.
It's extremely dangerous to talk with inaccurate information in such matters.
Well, I have accurate data. So, I mean, we could also talk about the propaganda SMS sent by the mobile phone providers. We can get to that later. I have data, independent data from Egyptians, and that I gathered myself. So, while it might be dangerous to have this conversation, I'm happy to talk about it because it's truthful. For example, did someone hold a gun to the heads of your engineers and said, block these sites? Because NOR did not do this blocking. The NOR ISP did not do this. So why did TE Data collaborate with the Mubarak regime and block these sites and try to stop the revolution?
Okay. Jacob,
you want to build a future? Will you agree to stand against all censorship? Will you abide by the Egyptian constitution? Wait, please. I ask you right now, since you're here, every person, Vodafone, Nokia, who collaborates with the Iranian dictators and apparently Mubarak for a year. So I'd like to know, will you all agree to stand against censorship on the internet and to abide by the Egyptian constitution? Will you do it? Is that a yes?
Just a minute please. كنت أحب أسمع من TE Data اللي هي نفسها TE اللي بيملكها الشعب المصري إنها ستحترم حقوق المواطن المصري مش هتحترم القانون.
Shmondes,
will you agree to stand against censorship?
We'll come back, Jacob, we'll come back to the panel.
He's got the microphone. I'd just like to ask.
We'll come back to the panel.
It's okay. He can say yes because he believes in the right of the Egyptian people.
We'll come back to the panel. We have a question there.
Okay.
So Egypt is a place that's very near and dear to my heart. I did some trainings in the Middle East. I even studied Arabic very, very badly. I'm, non-existence. It's much worse than my German. In 2009, and I went to Egypt. I taught people about OTR. I taught people about how to use Jabber. I taught them about various different communication systems and how to use them safely. And at the time, I met some censors, and they told me, oh yeah, we use the Cisco gear, and we do deep packet inspection on enemies of the state. And yeah, well, I don't think too much about it, but obviously they're bad guys. So this is a pretty serious problem, but we tried our best to tell people in Egypt, look, surveillance is a big deal. You don't see it yet, but when you see it, it will be very bad because what someone can do is pretty serious. And so what happened in Egypt, of course, everyone knows, is that there was a revolution. And in fact, it's not that the revolution happened and it stopped on January 25th of this year. Rather, it is the case that the revolution is continuing nonstop, right? So this January 25th revolution is still going on right now. To hear, according to some of my friends that are in Cairo, covered with snipers. There are people that are being shot in the eyes. I mean, there's like a real serious thing going on in Egypt. And in the case of Mubarak pulling the plug on the internet, we saw that there was selective filtering. So for example, Twitter was filtered IP address by IP address. And so there was a case where a couple of the IP addresses were not filtered, and you could still sort of you could sort of reach some of them from some ISPs, and then sometimes you couldn't. But on Telecom Egypt data links, There were 2 IP addresses which were never filtered, but other ones on the same /24 that were. So you could prove without any question that they were filtering that right at the DSLAM for the DSL modem. And that's a pretty interesting fact. And in fact, I went to Egypt after January 25th again, and I was on a panel with someone from Nokia, Vodafone, Telecom Egypt, the head of the communications agency for Egypt, and I sat on this panel with them, which was a little bit awkward for them. And I said, you know, now that the dictatorship is gone, I have talked to many people in Egypt that wish to ensure that the Egyptian constitution is something that you respect. So will you agree to never censor the internet again? Will you agree to never send propaganda for whichever regime tries to pop up next? And Vodafone made the usual arguments about pornography and all the other nonsense things about terrorism. And they don't talk about, for example, how their spreading of propaganda is in fact propagating state-based terrorism against individuals that live in Egypt. They just sort of gloss over that. And that's something you can't just stand and listen to. So I, of course, said, well, I have evidence that shows that you actively engaged in censorship. And the Telecom Egypt executive said, that's not true, you're wrong. And I said, no, I have the data, and I'd be happy to provide it in a court of law. I mean, I'm not really a fan of law, but in your case, I'll make an exception. And, you know, I'd be happy to provide it. And he said, I'm not saying you're lying, but okay. And he stopped arguing with me because he knew damn well that he had specifically and selectively targeted certain things for censorship and that they had collaborated with the regime. And there would be a time of reckoning. And when that time came, it would not be pretty for him. We got this on videotape, by the way, which is pretty great. But of course, unplugging the internet sort of changes everything. And as we can see here, there was a demand, and then there was a drop. And that's pretty serious. They basically promised they won't do it again. However, and if you have a Vodafone SIM, you should consider contacting them about this. Vodafone said, we will do whatever the law says. Whatever is legal, they will do that. So what they basically said is, no matter what happens, we will do what we are told regardless of the consequences. It's not because we're afraid we'll be killed. It is because our corporate charter is perfectly aligned with the law. Right and wrong go with the law, hand in hand. And I confronted them repeatedly about this, and they continue to say that. That is not an acceptable standard of right and wrong, actually, and certainly not in a dictatorship, where the rule of law is not controlled in any way through the consent of the people that are governed by this law. And it is really important to drive that home. These laws are bullshit, and we should disobey them. And these corporations should be punished by everybody for doing that.